Welcome to the Explainer. So let's just dive right in. We're looking at how early management theories literally still dictate our modern work lives. If you've ever felt like your workplace is kind of disconnected, or maybe lacking a bit in ethical grounding, well, you're definitely not alone. And the wild part? The root of that feeling actually goes back well over a century. Can a management theorist from the 1920s actually solve today's corporate ethics crises? To answer that, we've got to look at an absolute visionary. Someone who predicted the root causes of modern workplace toxicity decades before toxic workplace was even a buzzword. We are talking about a time when the whole concept of management was barely in its infancy, yet this person was already seeing the cracks in the foundation. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll hit the industrial work revolution, meet Mary Parker Follett, explore the power of integration, look at giving orders and feedback, touch on modern leader-member exchange, and finally bring it all home to ethics in today's workplace. All right, part 1, the industrial work revolution. Think about it. Before the 1800s, people rarely worked in huge groups, right? You were probably a small-scale farmer, a shopkeeper, maybe a shoemaker. You lived and worked in your own little geographic bubble. But then, boom, the Industrial Revolution changed the whole shebang. Suddenly, workers were crammed under one roof in these harsh, unair-conditioned, uncarpeted factories. Management had to instantly figure out job specialization, and people worked incredibly hard, mostly driven by the Protestant work ethic, that deep-seated belief that work itself was inherently moral. Naturally, this led to a massive split in how to actually manage people. On one side, around 1881, you had the classical school. Think Frederick W. Taylor's scientific management. They looked at workers purely as the economic man, motivated strictly by money, paid by the piece. Their only obsession was finding the one best way to maximize efficiency. But countering that, a totally new wave started forming, the human relations movement. They actually cared about organizational behavior, the social environment, and treating workers as complex humans who genuinely needed integration, not just a paycheck. Which brings us to part 2. Meet Mary Parker Follett. She is often called the mother of modern management, and for good reason. She was a complete trailblazer, rejecting those dehumanizing hierarchical controls in favor of holistic group dynamics. Now, keep in mind, she was making waves as an intensely unorthodox thinker in a heavily male-dominated business world back in the early 20th century. Follett lectured everywhere that individual behavior and group synergy were the actual, real keys to business success. She basically wanted to tear down those damaging top-down controls that were just turning employees into robots. And here's her absolute game-changer concept: employee integration. She firmly believed true power was never top-down. Instead, it came from the commingling and open problem-solving of teams. Basically, it's the idea that all the interdependent parts of an organization have to contribute to a synergistic whole, the sum of its parts, right? In her eyes, a leader's job wasn't to just force compliance, but to guide the group's energy to actually create that synergy. Moving on to part 3, the power of integration. Follett took this even further by completely redefining leadership with what she called the law of the situation. This was a direct slap in the face to scientific management's one best way approach. She argued there is absolutely no universal best way to do anything, none. Instead, a real business leader has to appropriately diagnose the specific situation in front of them, recognize the shifting variables, and adapt. Leadership is situational, and quite frankly, it can happen at literally any level of a company. Building right off that, she introduced the circular or reciprocal response. The core idea here is that communication is absolutely not a one-way street. The environment and the situation are constantly bouncing off each other. Every single message you send out as a leader yields a result, and that result serves as instant feedback right back to you. So if a leader communicates carelessly, they could instantaneously trigger an unethical or completely negative response from their entire team. It's a constant loop. Okay, let's hit part 4, giving orders and feedback. Now, how do you actually use this authority? Follett broke down the simple act of giving orders into 3 super specific steps, and the goal here is to force leaders to internalize their ethical decisions rather than just acting on whatever they selfishly prefer. First up is the conscious attitude. This means realizing that your team is reading implied context into everything you say. Second, the responsible attitude. This is where you have to apply ethical constraints and moral judgments to what you're asking. And third, the experimental attitude. You literally test and review your findings to figure out the absolute best circumstances for issuing those orders. At the end of the day, orders have to be based on creating overall value for the entire organization. Period. It is never, ever about the perceived right of the boss to just bark orders at people. If a manager totally ignores the ethical constraints and the broader value of what they're commanding, they shatter the trust. And trust is literally the glue holding the entire organizational structure together. This brings us to part 5, modern leader-member exchange. So fast forward to today's academic metrics, and it turns out Follett was just unbelievably ahead of her time. Today, researchers use the term leader-member exchange, or LMX for short. This is the dyadic, meaning one-on-one relationship between a leader and an employee that affects work attitudes and well-being. In plain English, LMX is just the vibe, the communication, and the trust between you and your boss. And guess what? Studies show this specific relationship is the #1 strongest predictor of whether you actually like your job and if you're going to stick around. And that LMX vibe directly dictates the 5 core job characteristics: autonomy, skill variety, task identity, task feedback, and task significance. These 5 objective dimensions, especially the amount of autonomy you're given and the fairness of your task feedback, literally control your motivational potential. Think about it. If a boss plays favorites, giving one person way more autonomy or much better feedback, it instantly damages the motivation and the affective commitment of the entire team. Now, different leadership styles have a huge impact on that LMX relationship. You've got transactional leadership on one hand, which simply exchanges rewards for effort. You do X, I pay you Y. It gets the expected performance, sure, but nothing more. But then you have transformational leadership, which expands needs way above self-interest. This is practically a mirror image of Mary Parker Follett's ideal of integration. It creates an incredibly strong, positive emotional attachment and real, deep-rooted organizational loyalty. Finally, part 6, ethics in today's workplace. So, why does this matter today? You're probably sitting there wondering how an academic management theory from the Roaring '20s connects to the corporate landscape we see on the news right now. Well, the stakes are honestly massive. The source material explicitly connects a deficiency of effective leadership and trust directly to massive corporate failures. We are talking about the huge, catastrophic, unethical practices. Think Enron, WorldCom, Tyco. Those epic failures didn't just pop up overnight. They were the result of a slow, steady erosion of that leader-member exchange. When leaders start making decisions based on their own selfish preferences rather than the overall value of the organization, corruption just easily seeps in. And the scary part? The damage is almost never contained to just one bad manager and one unhappy employee. Researchers call this nonlinear chaos. When a leader shows unfairness, like crazy feedback inequality or unfair autonomy, that dissatisfaction doesn't stay linear. It spreads geometrically. One unhappy employee complains to a peer, who then complains to a totally different manager. It ripples chaotically across coworkers and teams, eventually collapsing the entire organization's focus. It's like a wildfire. So, to prevent the next Enron, researchers are arguing that higher education seriously needs to wake up. Tacking on a single, standalone ethics class at the end of a degree just isn't cutting it. Institutions universally need to integrate Mary Parker Follett's works into the very core of collegiate business ethics curriculum. Her blueprint on corporate social responsibility and situational ethics is basically essential survival gear for all future managers. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to evaluate your own workplace through Follett's century-old lens. Look at your team, look at your managers. Is your relationship with your leaders strictly transactional, just trading effort for a paycheck? Or is it transformational enough to inspire true ethical commitment? Seriously, ask yourself, is your organization truly integrated, or is it just a 19th century factory in a modern disguise?